Thank you.
Thank you. Please can I welcome everyone to this meeting of Council in the Council Chamber at the Castle Hill, Winchester. The first item of business this evening are the minutes of the previous meetings of the Council. Members, the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Council held on 9th of July 2025 are set on pages 5 to 9 of your agenda pack. Are these agreed as a correct record? Thank you. The next agenda item is disclosures of interests. Are there any disclosures of interest to be made regarding the business before us this evening?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I need to declare that I have a disclosable pecuniary interest in respect of item 6 on the agenda due to my additional role as a Hampshire County Councillor. However, as there is no material conflict of interest regarding this item, I have a dispensation granted by the Audit and Governance Committee that enables me to speak and vote on this matter.
Councillor Wallace, please.
Can I make the same declaration, please?
I'd like to make the same declaration, please.
Please.
To make the same declaration. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Pett, please.
Just a variation on the theme. I need to declare I have a disclosable pecuniary interest in respect of being the authority's appointed member of the South Downs National Park Authority, but I have a dispensation granted by the monitoring officer.
Thank you, Councillor Pett. The next agenda item is announcements. Since our last meeting, here are just a few of special events that I have attended. On 15th August, together with the Royal British Legion, I hosted a well-attended and hugely enjoyable afternoon tea in Abbey House to commemorate VJ 80. On 23rd August, I joined the Ukraine Independence Day celebrations, and the following week, there was a wonderful concert in aid of my charities featuring classical music performed by a group of talented Ukrainian musicians. As in traditional, on the 9th of September, I welcome to Abbey House members of staff who have dedicated their service to the City Council for 25 years. After a presentation, I very much enjoyed talking to each of them and their guests. Wonderful commitment to the society and to the office. More recently, on 12th September, I very much enjoyed the annual Mayor's Match at Hyde Abbey Bowls Club, and then on 13th September, I welcomed many visitors to Abbey House as part of the Heritage Open Days program. Many thanks to councillors Jerry Pett, Russell Gordon-Smith, Sue Cook, and past Mayor Richard Izard and Reverend Graham Topping, who all helped to facilitate. Finally, last Saturday was the Winchester Green Fair, which has been excellently organized by the Council's sustainability team as the launch event for the Winchester Green Week. It has been extremely successful. There were lots of visitors and there was a buzz in the air. With regards to my forthcoming charities events, there is a Bollywood evening on Saturday the 25th of October in Colden Common Community Hall, and then a piano jazz concert by Robert Carter on Friday the 7th November at St. Paul's Church in Winchester. Please do contact me for more details. Mr. Mess Bearer, thank you for accompanying me this evening. Leader, do you have any announcements?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have an announcement. The Independent Planning Inspector for the Winchester District Local Plan has published her initial findings following the recent examination hearings, marking an important milestone for the plan and confirmation it can move to the next stage. In the letter, the inspector indicates that the plan is on track to passing the necessary steps for adoption, subject to some agreed amendments known as main modifications. In the letter, the inspector has also confirmed the Council's approach to dealing with unmet housing need, and the duty to cooperate is sound. An important part of the plan for the Winchester district was the introduction of local energy efficiency standards that go beyond current or planned building regulations, part of the council's commitment to going greener faster, reducing carbon emissions and reducing energy bills for residents. The inspector has also found, subject to the council's proposed modifications being consistent with national policy, that the approach is justified and effective and therefore sound. This is really good news. At a time when other areas are facing the threat of unplanned developments on greenfield sites being given permission based on planning appeals, this update means the City Council remains in the best possible place to resist that. We wanted the highest possible environmental standards and protections, more affordable homes, and to ensure that development in our area is properly planned, and this keeps us on track to deliver. We owe a huge debt of gratitude to Adrian Fox and the strategic planning team. Their perseverance, their professionalism, their expertise has delivered a stunning result, and we owe them and all the other colleagues in the council who've worked with them an enormous amount.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Good evening, members, and thank you for that appreciation of our local planning team, who are absolutely best in class and do the best for our district at all times. And apologies for this evening's meeting, Mr Mayor, have been received from Councillors Bennett, Murphy, Power, Warwick, Westwood and Wise. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. The next item, item 4, questions from the members of the public. We have no questions before us this evening. Agenda item 5 is questions from the members of the council. But before we move into the questions, I would suggest that we should hear from the leader. It will be helpful to give us an introductory report on what's happening over there. Please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. And I'll be doing this instead of the report at the introduction to item 6, but it felt useful to maybe start with the introduction to the paper, then take the written questions, then take oral questions, and then move into debate. So, colleagues, the process that began on February the 5th, 2025, when we received an email from the then Minister of State for Local Government, formally asking us to work with other council leaders on a proposal for reorganisation, is reaching the end, or rather it's the end of the beginning. And we are a day away or 2 days away from making a submission to government. So the first stage of the process is about to close. It isn't a process we would have chosen. It isn't a timing we would have chosen. They aren't the criteria that we would have chosen. But none of that matters. We've been to set a test. We have to decide whether to submit and what we're going to submit. After Friday, the government will be filtering the proposals, the options that are submitted. They'll be choosing which ones to take forward to consultation. They'll then be consulting between November and January. They'll be deciding in March. And if we don't submit something, that guarantees that an option that we believe could meet our needs will not be chosen by government. As I stand here today, we know that Hampshire, earlier in the day, has somewhat half-heartedly, with only 34 out of 78 councillors backing the scheme, proposed that Winchester be merged with Basingstoke-and-Deane, Hart, Rushmore and East Hampshire, putting us into one council with communities including Basingstoke, Fleet, Aldershot, Petersfield and Horndean, an authority that stretches somewhat conveniently from Blackwater to Whiteley, and from Highclere Castle to Rowlands Castle. Unless there's a very big surprise in their cabinet tomorrow, that proposal is going in. Nothing we do here today will change that. Several other councils are meeting as we speak, and nothing we do here today will change their decisions either. We are making the decision about what we as a council submit, whether we will make a submission, and whether that submission should be the one that, in consultation, was backed by our residents, the so-called option 2, which would put us into a unitary council with Test Valley and East Hampshire. And as far as the criteria are concerned, we believe we've met them all. The first thing is, it's been a team effort. One of the government's critical criteria was about working with other councils. We started working with 14 other councils. More recently, we've been working with 11 other councils, and the outside experts in reorganisation, adult services and children's services that we've needed to bring forward a robust proposal that will deliver from our residents. And I would stress that our officers have worked so hard in order, as part of that teamwork, to bring that proposal together. And actually, in many cases, have really led that collaboration process across the area. I would like to pay tribute to Laura, to Liz, to Gareth and Jade, and the wider council team who've all contributed so much for the staggering amount of work that they've had to do on this, on top of all the other things that are involved in running the council. It's greatly appreciated. It's also been a rigorous process, looking at a wide range of criteria, combining top-down benchmarking compared to other previous reorganisations with bottom-up estimates of cost savings. Importantly, the process we've used is an approach that's been accepted by government. And we've consulted widely. We've also made sure that our partners take the results of that consultation and the views of Winchester residents and parishes seriously. The proposal in front of us also takes place and identity seriously. And we've been particularly careful to ensure that all the unitaries in our preferred option 2 make sense. It's quite striking when you read the options. Actually, the others ended up having to adjust their options because we laid out why we thought all 4 authorities made sense. The Northern Authority with Basingstoke, Rushmore and Hart, the Central Authority with Winchester, Test Valley and East Hampshire, the South Western Authority with New Forest, Southampton and Eastleigh, and the Southeastern Authority with Havant, Fareham, Gosport and Portsmouth, and then of course unanimous support across all authorities that the Isle of Wight, well except perhaps the Isle of Wight, but no, including the Isle of Wight, that the Isle of Wight is a special case that needs handling specially. So all 4 of the authorities in our proposals on the mainland have their own social and economic logic. They make sense. And it's a positive plan as well. Serious thinking, not just about how we do the absolutely essential thing of protecting the services that we have to protect as we transition from one system to another, but also how we can use the combination of a more local upper-tier authority and unitarisation to deliver better results for our residents. And now we have to choose. Now, let's be clear, a decision not to submit is not a decision to do nothing. It's to say there will be fewer options in front of government. They will be choosing for whether to choose an option that effectively merges Winchester with Basingstoke and Aldershot, or a 5 unitary option that puts us with the New Forest. It's only if we submit the option in front of us today that we have the option that we want on the table in front of government. And neither of the other 2 options that we talked about are what our residents want. The option we propose is simple, balanced, locally supported, a coherent and balanced set of authorities for the mainland, strong local identity. It doesn't require boundary changes, thus ensuring it's simpler to implement, while configured to deliver better services and ensured devolved power with a community focus. Sensible, proportionate, place-based geographies. Close enough to deliver responsively and locally to our residents, big enough to protect and deliver the essential services we need. In the end, we will not be designing every element of the future here this evening. We can't. These are going to be new authorities with new councillors that set their new vision, their own vision and plan for the future. But we can create the best possible positive platform for those councils to succeed, and for the residents of that area and for our area to thrive, and when they need support, to get the support they need. That's the basis of the proposal in front of you this evening, and that's what I would like you all to support tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Members who have submitted questions will be invited in turn to either read out their question or refer to this as set out, which will be in the order that they are published on the Council's website. A reminder also that our procedure is that only the questioner can ask one supplementary question and should indicate accordingly. Members are reminded that our procedure rules allows that the total time occupied by questions and answers and the supplementary shall not exceed 40 minutes. Members, in turn, I will invite you to ask you a question and the leader will respond. Can I ask that any supplementary question is succinct and to the point? As a reminder, written answers will be published to the questions submitted on the website. Question number 1. The Councillor Bolton,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The business case asserts that contract savings of around 25 million per annum will be made across a variety of services, including waste, highways, etc. Please explain the basis of this assumption, and can you provide detailed figures to back this up? Thank you.
Councillor Todd, please.
Thank you very much indeed. The £25 million in assumed contract savings in question come from contract consolidation costs for those services where different councils have different providers, and consolidation of those providers offers opportunities for efficiency savings. So while the most obvious areas of saving that this relates to comes from areas where unitaries, districts and boroughs have different providers for the similar services they have, such as waste collections, there will also be opportunities to make service savings by combining unitary and upper tier contracts for the unitaries that include Southampton and Portsmouth into larger scale contracts for those for areas such as care and highways. At this stage in the process, as is normal at the early stage of transformation planning, these savings have been estimated based on similar work done for similar analyses in the past, cross-checked with a bottom-up reality check based on the current situation in our region, and then phased over time to reflect a realistic estimate of how long it will take to implement them. The exact details of individual savings on particular contracts will be developed using the approach outlined in Appendix 5 of the report for service contract consolidation at the next stage of the process.
Councillor Bolton, do you have a supplementary?
I do, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Todd. Given that this is also predicated on some past experience of the consultants, KPMG, were you given any indication of confidence levels, particularly arising out of that past experience and how things turned out in the end, so that you have some degree of surety around whether those sort of savings will materialise or to what extent they'll materialise? Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Todd, please.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, so altogether I think there were 14 previous cases for change that were analysed. Almost all of those, bar two, post-date 2018, so they were 2019 onwards. They're all fairly recent. They're after the economic crisis, and that was used to create a range of savings scenarios, which would be, and hopefully Ms. Keys will correct me if I get any of this wrong, glare at me, low, medium and high. And we then, depending on the area, it was decided by officers working together which one of those options they would take. Overall savings, we then discounted on the basis that the local government family has continued driving savings over time so that we wouldn't take the full savings that were promised in previous reorganisations. We discounted it to try and cope with that factor being in place. So it was quite a complicated top-up, bottom-up and top-down approach that was taken, which may not be what has been characterised in some of the media communication, but it was something that effectively used previous experience to provide a reality check of what was a sensible estimate, and then looked from the bottom up to say, from our own experience, whether that made sense.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Question 2, Councillor Godfrey, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could you tell me what social care cost savings are forecast to be delivered by each new council, given the number of adult and children's service users remains the same over the Hampshire area, and that there will be 5 of each service rather than the current 4?
Councillor Todd, please.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. If you look at page 15, so the bid doesn't actually assume significant savings from social care. Quite the opposite. Indeed, if you look at page 158 of the appendix, it assumes that there will be some additional costs due to disaggregation, and it makes an estimate of those in the report. You are absolutely right, though, to be raising the question of social care costs, because it focuses attention on the biggest financial risk that we have with the entire project, and one that quite rightly was highlighted in debate this morning at the County Council, that government needs to get in hand. I mean, no scenario put forward by any council. So it's important to explain what's going on with these analyses. These analyses are looking at the cost of implementing the change and the savings that come out of that change. What they're not doing is looking at, does this fix the county's deficit? Does this fix the challenges that are faced by the unitaries with their finances? It doesn't do that. It's not designed to do that. It couldn't do that. The amount in question is too much, and no scenario proposed by any council solves that. So the need to solve the social care funding problem, both for adult services and SEND, remains, and children's services remains. And no scenario proposed by the county or by us can wholly deal with that. But one of the things I think we've learned as we've worked on this project is that sometimes scale is not your friend. Beyond a certain point, it actually makes it harder to do some of the kind of changes that you can do to increase the prevention and reduce cost. Smaller unitary councils, I mean, I heard the other day, and I'm not proposing this, that there's one unitary council which is smaller than Winchester and has outstanding children's services. I don't quite know how they've managed it, and all credit to them. But it's very much the thinking behind the proposals we have is that smaller unitary councils, based on real communities rather than arbitrary lines on a map to achieve a target population, are really the key to transforming these services. One obvious opportunity: proper integration with housing will allow for more people with social care needs to have their own front door and avoid institutional care. Where families are under strain because of homelessness or inadequate housing, solutions can be found which makes it less likely that children need to go into care. The reason our plan will work is because it recognises that families in trouble and people with social care needs benefit hugely from access to the resources that we have in our communities. Many are not provided by the state, but some, like healthcare, are. Working locally with real people who are known to services, the plans in front of us tonight give us the opportunity to do a much better job at targeting and meeting need, focusing on prevention and avoiding the need for high-cost statutory services.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Councillor Godfrey, do you have a supplementary, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm grateful for Lee's response. I did note in the report, and welcome, and on page 85 of the report, acknowledgement that adult social care cost pressures continue to mount. Which is why I was surprised that you were not able to respond to my colleague's previous question about contracts in any detail, because the assumptions in the report explicitly mention care costs as a providing a significant part of the savings. The contract's delivering 30% of all savings, of which care is one of those items mentioned. So what care costs are going to be targeted, and how is that going to affect the future unitaries?
Councillor Todd, please.
Well, as I've said, there is an assumption that there will be some increased cost pressure as a result of contract disaggregation. But because the savings are about contract consolidation, that's why they're not in the numbers. There is only one, assuming where we have Hampshire-wide contracts, obviously the Northern Authority, for example, which sits wholly within Hampshire, will not see contract consolidation savings because it can't. There's one contract that covers the area. And the extra cost of splitting that contract up is covered in the finances. Similarly, that's broadly the case for the Middle Authority, certainly in what we've put forward. Where there are opportunities is in the two Southern Authorities, where suddenly the footprint of the Southampton care contract and the care contracts that relate to the rest of those unitaries can be consolidated, and similarly for the South Eastern Authority, and those are the savings that are assumed as far as consolidation is concerned. But, I mean, it's a really key point here. The reason we don't promise contract consolidation savings for care on an overall level is because contracts aren't being consolidated. So why would we assume contract consolidation savings?
It's in the report.
Yeah, and I've told you where there is some contract consolidation and where those savings are made. But they're not being made in the Middle and Northern Authority.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Question 3, Councillor Horrell, please.
Mr. Mayor, good evening, and thank you for allowing me to raise my question. In the recommended proposal from the administration, the right sizing of the new organisation is a key driver of cost savings, indicated to be circa 32 million. How many staff and from which councils and from which functions will these savings be delivered? Which council services will no longer be delivered in the new unitary? Thank you.
Councillor Todd, please.
So the savings from local government reorganisation in the bid are based mainly on the merger of what might be called like functions. So these are where you have different functions in different councils, which you've brought together in the same function provided separately in different councils, which you have then brought together in a unitary. And this generates savings in management costs, corporate functions, contracts. So generally the like functions being merged do not include adult and children's services because they have a common footprint, although they do in those authorities that include Southampton and Portsmouth. It's important to state, though, that part of what's in this plan is that we're not just taking what there is and sort of cutting it up and gluing it back together again. It is very important to have the mindset that these are new authorities. There is a real opportunity, particularly within the Hampshire County Council footprint. These are new councils, and there is an opportunity to design new organisations rather than being stuck with the structures of the past. Smaller unitaries can have fewer tiers of management, clearer line of sight into practice, and more reliance on direct management rather than the audit and quality control measures necessary to ensure consistency of practice in very, very large organisations. Recognising that, our biggest priority is to ensure continuity of the many critical services provided by all the councils in Hampshire. I get rather annoyed when Hampshire County Council kind of assumes that they're the only ones providing critical services. Through 2P and contract novation, and that provides the safeguards in terms of dealing with the risks of change. You know, when you create a new authority in the north of the county, the people working in most cases for the county council or for the district councils in that area aren't going to suddenly vanish overnight. They will be carried forward into the new organisation. The savings will be coming from where there are duplication between in that particular case, 4 authorities that are being brought together. There's also no assumptions in the plan about getting rid of any services. That isn't the basis that the calculation has been done on. At this stage, the level of detailed workforce and functional planning has not been completed, although the plan is clear that the opportunity of local government reorganisation lies in reducing duplication rather than cutting service provision. And obviously, as soon as we have clarity about what the new authority is likely to be, so when we've had the March decision out of government, that work will be absolutely the critical priority in the next stage of implementation planning.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Councillor Horrell, do you have a supplementary, please?
I do, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Todd, for your reply. I'm struggling, if I'm honest. I'm not adverse to options on the table, but I am struggling to see where the detailed financial analysis that you're referring to exists. The monitoring officer has told my group that there is no other financial data available for any of us as councillors. So I'm questioning, where is that detail in the report? Because I have read that and the appendices on how that 32 million saving is actually made up in the submission. And I know you say there are assumptions based on previous experience that are being used by the consultants to provide some recommendations. But clearly, the financial stability of a new unitary is fundamental. And I don't see at the moment where those numbers are coming from, and I'd be grateful if you could refer me to the correct report and the correct page so that I could understand your submission to us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Councillor Todd, please.
I'm slightly baffled by these comments, to be honest. We don't, provide you with absolute line-by-line accounts when we bring forward a Winchester City Council financial report. We quite rightly provide people with the management information they need to make a decision. And we trust that our officers, as indeed we do here, have worked effectively either with their internal colleagues or with the outside consultants to produce work to the right standard, so that as we see the overall outcomes of that work, we're in a position to assess it. And I would stress that probably in terms of getting Section 151 officer scrutiny, these are probably some of the most scrutinised papers in the history of this council. What we have in front of us today hasn't just been scrutinised by our own Section 151 officer, and I would stress that as far as I'm concerned, I would consider that enough, but it's actually been scrutinised by the other 11 Section 151 officers, and we have rightly relied on them to do the detailed working, to do in the same way as we do in all our work, the detailed financial analysis that sits beneath it. We've relied on them to do that work and to provide us with the necessary summary information to make sound decisions. That's what we normally do. That's what we've done in this particular case.
Thank you, Councillor Todd.
I wonder whether Councillor Todd would be kind enough just for me to ask a build on his response. Would that be appropriate, given we're trying to work through these questions to the best of everyone's ability? Thank you.
I'll either have it now or as an oral question later on, so we might as well have it now.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. I accept that we have our outstanding officers, and I will in due course reiterate your point about the efforts that are made by staff on this project. However, this is such a fundamental change. It's not like just buying a new electric refuse truck. This is actually fundamentally changing our district into a unitary and a whole set of new services. So the lack of access for all of us to have that information, to have that financial data, is surprising. It's not that we don't trust our 151, clearly we do. However, this is so fundamental, and I'm really surprised that you expect all of us to make that fundamental decision without having that level of knowledge. Maybe you've seen it because you've been absolutely core to the core group, but the rest of us haven't. So that, I'm trying to understand, why is that? Why has that been kept from all of us in such an important decision? Because for some of us, it would certainly help us to come to the right conclusion. Thank you.
Councillor Todd, please.
Ultimately, we're not rewriting the papers tonight, and we are deciding whether to submit something. You can decide whether you propose, your group is going to vote for a merger with Basingstoke or not. That is the choice. The Conservatives in the Winchester district that have voted so far on the issue have voted for that. That we are not in a position to get into, I mean, I'm very happy to talk about the financial modelling that's been done, the structures that have been done, how it compares to other authorities, how it may have done it. But I would stress, they've made their decision, they've made their submission. We just have to decide whether and what we're going to submit, with the awareness that if we do not submit, then our option is off the table. And ultimately, in terms of the four mainland unitary situation, the truth is, as we looked at the different options, financially, there are some differences, but they are not overwhelming. If you're talking about reopening the 3 versus 4 discussion, that is a discussion, 3 mainland unitaries versus 4, that is a discussion I'm more than open to have. But actually, even at that point, the level of difference is a high-level argument. I mean, those of us who are county councillors will tell you that that level of detail is not available in any bid anywhere that we're aware of. It's certainly not available in the county council proposals, where some of the financial assumptions were such that, frankly, we were utterly baffled as to how they reached them. So I would stress that, you know, we've been told in terms of the detailed diagnostic information that we've provided that we've actually done more than any other collection of authorities has ever done in terms of the level of finance. You talk about the individual finances of individual council, individual unitaries. One difference is the 12 have done that. The county council has not provided finances of individual unitaries. I mean, that's another of the differences in terms of how people have been done. They've argued on a kind of aggregate level. You have high-quality summary information that's been carefully scrutinised by our professional colleagues to make sure that it appropriately thinks about the risks that we face, but in the end, we have to decide. And there is no information I can give you this evening that ultimately would actually give you very much more to help you decide one way or another. I'm in a position that I trust the professionals that we worked with. I take that they have done the due diligence that is necessary to have a robust proposal in front of us. That's what I believe we have. The papers in all 11 authorities that are still putting this paper forward are signed off by their 151 officers. And at a certain point, in terms of the detailed financial assessment of what's involved, we all have to accept that.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Question number 4, Councillor Brooke, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. How will 5.3 million... I'm flashing. Is that it? There we go. We're there now. How will 5.3 million to 7.2 million of IT system cost savings be delivered if the number of major service directorates will be 5 of each service rather than 4? The number of IT licences would increase, and in order to meet SLAs, the number of staff would need to increase, particularly as some councils have already made cost savings by sharing IT departments.
Todd, please.
Thank you very much indeed. It doesn't automatically follow that the services with the highest staffing cost, which is what I assume you mean by major service directorates, have the highest IT costs. Services such as planning, housing, benefits management, and tax collection, as well as the customer service systems used to manage services in all councils, are complex, getting more complex, and in many of those services, those areas, there are 14 or 15 systems in place with the potential to be reduced down to 5. This will drive significant saving, and this is what's highlighted in the report. And that is before consideration of the further savings opportunities from joint services, such as those we share with Test Valley, or indeed that Hampshire County Council currently provides to councils such as Oxfordshire. That said, there is recognition in the setup costs in achieving this transformation. Page 157 of the report shows that, the appendix shows that 31% of the setup costs, where interestingly, County and the 12 have very similar estimates, relate to IT consolidation. It is also true that there could be one extra system for children's and adult services, but the experience of other places, at least initially, is that these are handled via data segregation and the creation of new instances of existing systems rather than the high cost of designing new systems from scratch. And the extra cost of that is included in the social care inefficiencies on page 158 of the appendix.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Councillor Brooke, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I do, thank you. So with regard to that, thank you for the answer to the question, Councillor Todd. All of the councils will operate fundamentally different ways of working, IT structure, the way that the laptops, how modern they are. Presumably that will also be consolidated, so we'll need quite an upfront cost to ensure that everything's consolidated, everyone's on the same page with regard to the actual physical IT, printers, that sort of thing, to make sure that you are keeping up to date, making sure that they're all on the same page. Is that true or is that not?
Thank you. Councillor Todd, please.
As I said, I think the upfront consolidated costs are about 140 million, and we're saying that this is 31% of that. So yes, 40 million pounds roughly, that's mental arithmetic, it may be slightly wrong, will be spent on that kind of IT consolidation, and it is in the finances. Indeed, IT consolidation is one of the highest ticket lines in the upfront costs of this proposal. 49 million, I've been told. So 49 million, which hopefully will cover a few laptops, quite a lot of laptops actually, and probably a few more licenses as well.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Question 5, Councillor Cunningham, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. With the waste collection arrangements in Test Valley being in-house and cheaper, Winchester, which is outsourced, and East Hants, which is shared arm's length organisation, what detailed assumptions are made about delivery of savings of waste collection when the methods are so different?
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Todd, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Cunningham. It is very true that the service offer in different areas is currently different. We collect glass from the doorstep, for example, and the main reason that Test Valley's service is cheaper is that they do not. And indeed, I greatly appreciate the opportunity to remind members that our recycling rate is currently 40.8%, up from the 32.3% that we inherited from the previous Conservative administration, which, as we all remember well, was an administration that, amongst its many other failings, was completely unable to collect the bins on time. That 40.8% is also significantly higher than that achieved under Conservative leadership in Test Valley and East Hampshire as well. And while we're at it, it's dramatically higher than that achieved by the other Conservative administrations in Hampshire, Fareham and New Forest too. But one of the consequences of moving to the national simpler recycling proposals is that we all will be moving to much simpler or much more similar systems that will provide a better basis for consolidation. As outlined earlier, we have not yet done the contract-by-contract review necessary to identify the precise savings achievable ongoing, although we've made similar assumptions to similar authorities in similar positions, and the detailed work on this will be completed when the government has decided the exact configuration of potential services.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Councillor Cunningham, do you have a supplementary?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you for the answer Mr Councillor Todd. Could you, however, give me an example in the last 5 years where entering into a new contract to share waste collection services has led any council locally to pay less for its waste collection than under the previous contract?
Councillor Todd, please.
I confess that I don't see it as my job as leader of Winchester City Council to review the consolidation waste collection programmes of every single local government reorganisation process in the entire country. And I think there's a useful thing that we need to put in place on all of this, okay? I get the impression from some colleagues here that you're arguing about the principle of unitarisation, but unfortunately, that's not our decision. That's not our decision. We do not get to decide whether there's going to be a unitary. We didn't decide to start this process. We won't decide what the configuration is of unitaries that go ahead. What we're deciding here tonight is what we want to submit as an authority, given the fact that the government has decided to do unitarisation, given the fact that they've decided that they will be making a decision. The question in front of us is, do we have an option that we want to give them to go into the next stage of the process? For them to consider whether it meets the 6 criteria that they've set, which I believe it does, and for them to consult and then to decide what the final configuration is that they decide on. But in the end, if the financial analysis says that moving to unitary councils is a bad idea, well, ultimately, that doesn't really get us anywhere because the government have said they're doing it. And our job is to make sure that as far as we're able, we get a good outcome, the best outcome that we can for our residents, for our county, for our district, and for the future residents of this county and district as well.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Question 6, Councillor Miller, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The report mentions implementation costs of 128 to 155 million are predicted over 6 years. Which councils will provide the funding for this and how is it going to fall in due course? And the contract savings are predicted to be 24 to 33 million savings. Which contracts will provide these savings and how is this broken down by council? As there'll be 5 highway contracts in the future rather than 4 contracts. Can there be savings on consolidation?
Thank you. Councillor Todd, please.
Thank you very much indeed. So as of the 31st of March 2025, there are £1.8 billion of total usable reserves across all authorities. And actually one of the things I think about our particular proposal, option 2, is that is, I think, the most balanced in terms of ensuring that each unitary has sufficient resources to fund the transformation costs outlined in the paper. And unlike some other proposals, we've actually modelled each new unitary and so can be confident that each of the unitaries in our proposal has the funds needed to transform. As the paper states, the exact details of how that transformation will be managed is for each new authority to determine, although it is likely to be through a mixture of use of reserves and capital receipts. In terms of how these costs fall, the table outlining this for the base year through to year 3 and for workforce transition, consolidation and contingency cost is outlined on page 157 of the appendix.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Councillor Miller, do you have a supplementary?
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. If a 6.39 million savings achieved in order to cover the implementation costs, what is a range of forecasts for each of the new councils? And looking at the contracts, what is the basis of stating these proposed options are financially sustainable if the only methodology is to use calculate savings is guesswork?
Councillor Todd, please.
Well, as I explained earlier in the process, that's one of the areas where the county's press release is profoundly misleading. They're slightly fairer in their more detailed papers, but let's be absolutely clear. There is, we have not done purely a top-down benchmarking versus previous authorities and used that as the sole basis for calculation. Throughout, each of the service areas has been looked at more carefully and the work has been done to understand and make sure that we have a proper basis for calculation. So your characterisation of the way that savings have been estimated is sadly incorrect. That isn't how they've been estimated. And the idea that, all we would do is have a look at a few old transformation cases and use that to estimate our savings is completely wrong. That isn't how it's been done. It wouldn't be appropriate, and we wouldn't have signed it off if it had been done that way. There has been judgment applied. There has been work done to look at a bottom-up approach, and if you read the Appendix 5 in detail, it makes it very clear it's not just top-down. Top-down provides a sort of envelope to understand that we're operating within sensible parameters. Bottom-up is the one that provides more detail to make sure that we've properly understood the saving opportunities.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Question 7, Councillor Lee, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll abbreviate my question. It is understood a risk register wasn't mandated by the government. However, there are concerns that option appraisal focused too heavily on financial modelling. Past LGRs show that many more important issues and risks were not considered, leading to future problems, both financial and non-financial. Without a published risk table, it is difficult to get an overview of the risks fully considered in determining the options. So perhaps you could help me by explaining how the risks were assessed for determining the options before us tonight and what may have been missed. And I provided some lists of a number of issues and risks which may or may not have been considered but are not necessarily captured in the option papers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Todd, please.
Thank you very much for your question. The government gave us very clear guidance on how they would assess our proposals, and as a consequence, the options appraisal completed was based on all 6 of the government's criteria and sub-criteria based on the guidance issued by MHCLG. The process we've used has been discussed by MHCLG and no issues have been raised around the approach taken. That's why you have the proposal in front of you, a proposal that is designed to persuade government against the criteria set by government. We have a test to pass, and ultimately there's no point in turning up to a maths test and writing an essay in French. That doesn't mean that we haven't been thinking about risk and wider issues. Risks, challenges and issues were captured as part of the service design workshops that covered the key services highlighted in criteria 3 of the case, and the key challenges with the current service delivery models are outlined in the document.
Thank you, Councillor Dodd. Councillor Lee, do you have a supplementary, please?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Todd. That would suggest to me that maybe some gaps or information missing. So I just wonder whether it's obviously too late for cabinet decision making, but to increase the confidence for members and residents, I just wonder whether at some stage a full risk register might be able to be put together to help us understand the robustness of the proposals. Thank you.
Councillor Todd, please.
After Friday, you're never going to see these proposals again, okay? In terms of the detailed planning that happens forward from here, the process is it goes into government. They decide which ones to consult on. People then have a chance to provide input on the options they decide to consult on, and then they decide. And then the detailed planning and risk registers work. Of course, once you get to the stage of implementation planning, that level of detailed consideration has to take place. And that will be where it takes place. But in terms of the decision-making from here, you know, it is quite possible that the project that we're being asked to implement isn't one that we wrote. Or it may not even be one that any of us wrote, because the government is actually able to modify the proposals that come forward. And that is when that kind of detailed work on understanding the detailed risks of implementation will take place. If a risk register was needed, I suggest the one that was really needed was the one in central government when they decided to start this project. Because frankly, that's where the risks sit with all of this. You know, is the actual fundamental conceptual idea that sits beneath it the right one? Now, one of the things we heard was that the original PwC report that triggered was the document that triggered all of this, the County Council Network report, you know, where the county councils went out and commissioned a report that, to everybody's complete astonishment, came back and said the best model for unitarisation was to merge everything into county councils. I don't quite know what people thought they were going to conclude, but frankly, if it hadn't concluded that, I suspect it wouldn't have been published. Somewhat to everybody's delight, the County Council Network has since published another report which has been widely taken as utterly discrediting this original report. But one of the things that became clear through the process following, I think, a freedom of information was that actually there hadn't been the adequate work done up front to assess the risks and issues. Ultimately, the situation, the choices that we are making are not about the principles of unitarisation. That has been given to us as a fait accompli. We were not asked whether we thought unitarisation was a good idea, and that is something we could potentially respond in the next stage of the process. We were asked to come up with a proposal. And then what you're talking about is the different risk profile between the different options that are on the table. Is it more risky? Some would say, and the county has said, that their option is less risky because of the scale that it provides. It is less risky in provision of certain services. We would say that actually that because of the scale it provides, it becomes more risky in certain aspects. Ultimately, at this stage, we can't know. Our job is to put forward the case that we believe to be right. I genuinely believe that the people who put forward the county's case believe it's right. And I genuinely, I'm putting this case forward because I believe it's right. And the other leaders and councils will be making their decisions on that kind of basis. But ultimately, the risks that sit within this are risks inherent in the process. And the difference in risk between the different options are relatively small. It is something that may be revealed later in the process, but overall, the right place that the risk register belongs is absolutely when we start that detailed planning. But the risks that are associated with the decision overall and the national programme, I suggest, sit with MHCLG.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. I know we are nearing to 40 minutes, but this is the last question, so I will allow that. There's question 8, Councillor Godfrey, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What assumptions have been made for forecasting the costs to each council of providing home-to-school transport after reorganisation? Given that the majority of the current nearly £75 million per year paid by HCC is required by students in the 4 main rural districts, so impacting primarily on the finances of a mid-Hants unitary under all 3 options. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for this question. I've learnt a whole bunch of new things that you're about to discover in my answer as a result of trying to find the answer to this. And I was on the committee at the County Council that looked at SEND transport. It is an enormous issue, as you will know. There was, in year 24-25, there was a £17 million hit on their school transport budget. And then they had to increase the budget by 40 million for 25-26. I mean, these are astronomical numbers. And it's important to note that rurality isn't the only driver of this. Now, rurality does play a very major role in mainstream school transport, and that will be a factor for any central authority. But that is only about 15 million of Hampshire's 65 million school budget, school transport spending. Relatively easily manageable within the Mid-Hampshire Authority's budget. And the type of rurality matters too. This turns out to be quite an interesting thing for those into this. It's affected by where your primary schools are and the distribution of your schools and market towns. And that has a surprisingly big effect, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And overall mainstream school transport isn't growing that quickly. And interestingly, we're not the only rural authorities. So we discovered that we did actually have figures for the number of young people receiving school transport. And I could do this as a quiz, but I'll just tell you anyway. And in descending order, number 1 is New Forest by quite a long method, and you'll have noticed that they are not in our proposal. Number 2 is East Hampshire. And the one thing we know about local government reorganisation, unless the government uses their major modifications to make dramatic changes, is every single scenario there is has us in with New Hampshire. East Hampshire, not New Hampshire. That would be an amazing unitary. I mean, yeah, I think the Isle of Wight thinks it's got a problem with ferries. Imagine Hampshire and New Hampshire. And then number 3 is Basingstoke and Deane. And I suspect that's because they actually have a very large rural area with small villages at the western end of their district. So the 2 of the 3 biggest are not actually in our option. We're number 4. And surprisingly, and this is where I think the distribution of primary schools and secondary schools probably has a factor, and we double-checked this because we couldn't quite believe it, is that in terms of average mileage per child transported, we're the lowest in the county. So we're not actually entirely knocked over by rurality in a way that we thought we would. We have about a third of the mileage of within the area that we're proposing in option 2, within of the total mileage of school transport in the Hampshire area. Now, SEND spending, on the other hand, is driven by SEND demand, and that's quite a complicated picture. It's less obviously linked to rurality, although obviously the distances would be. There's an increasingly complicated relationship to deprivation and the relative prosperity of given areas. So historically, SEND was more linked towards deprivation, and that relationship has been breaking down. Anecdotally, also, it relates to the proportion of schools that are academies, which sadly, in some cases, take quite an exclusionary approach to children with special educational needs. That can also happen with the private sector, and that is one of the things that puts extra pressure on the SEND budget. And we're quite good in our district in terms of we have fewer academies, I think, is my impression. Another consideration is that another driver of EHCP assessments for their children is that if people are dissatisfied with their local school, and one of the things about our schools is generally in the Winchester district, they're very good, or good, very good, or exceptional. And it is important to note that in terms of overall budget pressures, all of this is dwarfed by the project on the DSG budget, which is currently reported as overspending by 131 million, bringing the cumulative deficit to 344 million. I mean, these are enormous numbers. The statutory override, in theory, ends in March 2028, when the county estimate the accumulated deficit will be 706 million. And that is, I think, if not the worst, but one of the very worst in the entire country. And that, again, is something where a more manageable scale could make a real difference. Smaller unitaries, one of the ways to address this is by creating communities of schools and parents where trust in the system can be restored. This provides a model, potentially, for a more inclusive model of education where children's needs can be met without the additional resources linked to an individual plan. And we want to get to a place where nearly all children have the expectation that their needs will be met, usually in a mainstream school, but sometimes in a state special school. Of course, some children are always going to need very special provision, but these are wider policy issues, and hopefully the government's new proposals for SEND will do something about that. But certainly, those of us who work in that area are very keen that we get back to providing a mainstream and the necessary a mainstream school environment, which means that people may feel less need to seek specialist SEND provision. But this requires national policy change, but it is something that I think is very much an aspiration for those of us who've been engaged in those special educational needs areas.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Councillor Godfrey, do you have a supplementary?
Thank you. I'm very grateful for the full report back on special educational needs, homeschool transport. Although homeschool transport budget also transports people without SEND statements when they do not have spaces in their local schools, and it's beyond the relevant statutory mileage. However, the interesting point in your answer related to the difference financially on the impact on Winchester children compared with Basingstoke and New Forest. You mentioned the top most expensive councils, because this doesn't seem to be taken into account in the comparison between options presented in this paper. And I don't understand why, when the data is available, and you produced it at relatively short notice to answer my question, why this very significant differential between the different options caused by one item on the budget of home to school transport was not used, actual data was not used, and therefore we are not getting a full financial picture to compare options against.
Councillor Todd, please.
I'm not entirely clear whether it was used or not. The data was available, and I don't have the detail of whether it was in the modelling. But what it does do is give us a very simple answer, okay? Because in the end, the choice in front of us tonight says that if we do nothing, we either end up in an authority with Basingstoke and East Hampshire, 2 of the top 3, or we end up in an authority with East Hampshire and New Forest, 2 of the top 3. And in fact, any scenario we look at, other than the one that you have in front of us tonight, is likely to put extra pressure on the central authority. So that's the reality of the situation we're in. We're not in a position to refuse the government's, I mean, we can decide not to submit anything, but then we know that we will be signing up to an authority that faces significantly greater pressure on send transport than the proposal you have in front of us tonight.
Thank you very much, Councillor Todd. The next item of business this evening is agenda item 6, local government reorganisation. I know. Report CL 176 refers and is included in your agenda pack on page 11. This is a cover sheet to the report CAB 3515, which is a cabinet report concerning the council's proposed final submission regarding the local government reorganisation in Hampshire and Isle of Wight. This is included on page 15. Members, the recommendations for the council are as set out in the report CL 176 and also on the agenda. In summary, these are that council firstly considers the cabinet report and make any comments to cabinet to consider, and also that council notes that the cabinet is asked to approve the final submission to the government of proposals for local government reorganisation. The full proposal to government is set out as an appendix to report CAB 3515. Council is also asked to note that a final version of the proposal is under preparation following receipt of legal advice, and Council is also asked to agree the approach as to how any minor changes are to be dealt with prior to final submission. Finally, please can members note that there is a typographical error in recommendation 1 of report CAB 3515. The date of full council meeting is of course 24th of September and not 25th of September. Leader, will you please introduce the report?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can we take my previous introduction as read?
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Are there any questions for the leader?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What I'd like to do, if I may, Mr. Mayor, is come back to the risks which Councillor Todd has outlined as being inherent in the process, and we don't control them because we've been set the exam question. But that's not our fault that the exam question is wrong. Yes, the LGR criteria is, I believe, incomplete. There are some omissions, and I do believe it is driving some wrong or incomplete assumptions that are behind these proposals. I'm sorry, before I like to go on, I'd just like to say I'd like to thank the Chief Exec Officer and all officers who've worked tirelessly to deliver these proposals under almost impossible deadlines. Their effort is not in doubt, so thank you. So back to my question. Yes, it's a statement. So as I said, the wrong exam question was set, not our fault. The question was set for us. And the fixed criteria are incomplete, I say, with some omissions. So I'd just like to explore, you said, obviously, it would be churlish of us not to submit our proposals, and I get that. But there is a debate that might be worth airing in this council, and that maybe is a question of pausing what we're doing. My second point is that there are many moving parts which are creating some of these risks. And LGR coincides with, as we know, the mayoral authority, the new one, planning infrastructure bill, devolution bill, wider reforms, local government outcomes framework, which is also in gestation. Our options in advance of clarity on these, I suggest, maybe undermining our proposals when they get to MHCLG. But then, as you've already said, this is for MHCLG because they've set the question, they know what the background is. However, I think there are just too many unknowns. And is it perhaps better to step off with more solid and clear intent? So there may be an argument about pausing. And the other issue which I have raised to you, Leader, before is, as I know, it's set, the questions is set, but a full life cycle climate biodiversity impact assessment was not mandated. And if I look at UK 100, a cross-party network of ambitious councils,
Councillor
concerns,
Lee, can you be
precise,
please?
Lots of
question.
threats and so on. So basically, with weak community support, a fractured process with confusion of options, we've talked about the Hampshire and East Hants approach, we could be receiving an option which we haven't had a chance to even look at or debate in this council. So my question is, precedent is set. Northamptonshire, Cumbria, Somerset, North Yorkshire have deferred or paused the LGR process. Wealdon District Council is seeking to pause its proposal. And I would ask, is it not appropriate that we may consider doing exactly that for the aforementioned reasons and risks? Thank you.
Councillor Todd, please.
Thank you very much indeed. We asked for a delay in our submission in March. The government told us no. The Isle of Wight had a meeting earlier in the week where they failed to make a decision to support local government reorganisation. The earliest they can schedule to next week. They have contacted MHCLG and asked for advice as to whether their submission will be taken. They have been told no. If we do not submit on Friday, we do not make a submission. End of. That's it. We're out. And there is no delay, no prospect for delay, no other option is on the table. That's the choice in front of us tonight. There is no potential for delay. The government has been clear in their feedback back in March and in subsequent feedback to an authority that has had difficulty in making a decision in time. They have been told that any decision they make will be ignored.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Councillor Horrell, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Todd, I know you've dissed the Hampshire option a couple of times this evening, rather sadly. I think we should probably avoid that. But there is a fact difference here that I would like to try and understand. In 2.2 of the Cabinet report, the net annual savings of the case is 63.9 million. Hampshire estimate that there is a loss of over 31 million. Do you have any information you could share with us as to what are the key drivers of those two very different numbers that the different authorities have come to conclude? Thank you.
Councillor Todd, please.
Yeah, let me just quickly find the document. So, yes, I have had a look at that. So there are a range of differences in assumptions. And maybe I'll start with one that we all understand, which is, for example, the difference in the savings that you get by reducing the number of councillors. Now, everybody assumes all the options roughly cut the number of councillors in half, some slightly more, the county cuts them slightly more. The number of councillors has been cut in half. Because you're reducing the number of councils from 15 to 5, the number of meetings is being cut by 2/3. The number of elections is being cut by 3/4 because there's only one election every 4 years. And the county assumes that cost of a 5-unitary model is going to go up. It's clearly ludicrous. It's clearly ludicrous. And right across the board, there have been areas where our savings estimates are the same. So, for example, on senior management, their assumptions on staffing savings with 5 unitaries as opposed to 15 councils today are 3.4 million. We reckon by the time you divide it down, it's about 5 people per council as a result of local government reorganisation. It's clearly ridiculous. I mean, genuinely ridiculous as an assumption. So, I mean, I didn't particularly want to have this discussion. What we're being asked to do is put forward positive reasons for what we're doing. Back office corporate services. We assume that moving from 15 councils to 5, there might be a saving. Not a huge one, £1 million. The county assumes a £10 million increase, going from 15 councils to 5. Clearly ridiculous. I could go on. We have done that analysis right across the board. I will tell you, I won't make any comment on our own 151 officers, but they were genuinely shocked when the analysis came back at the assumptions the county made. I don't want to get into the details of I mean, I can carry on. I have a full set of comparisons across the board. I mean, there are some areas where, again, we've made estimates of disaggregation costs. They've got a £40 million difference. I mean, to give you another example of benchmarking for sense, I think that in Surrey, the assumption that I think Surrey County Council's made of going from two authorities to 3, 2 to 3, we're not talking 4 to 5 to 6, we're talking 2 to 3 is £15 million. Nobody ever, anywhere, has come close to that £60 million extra cost that the county has come up with for one extra authority. Not one project anywhere ever in the country has managed to even get close to that kind of extra cost on an annual basis. So genuinely, we find it really hard to understand where those figures come from. We don't particularly want to get into public arguments about it, but the scale of difference between how we calculated and how they calculated it was almost at the point of embarrassing.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Councillor Godfrey, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Has anyone in the Cabinet seen the detailed modelling of disaggregation and implementation costs mentioned on page 205 of the report? And who has provided the comparison that Councillor Todd just referred to between the HCC analysis and the WCC analysis?
Councillor Todd, please.
I mean, the comparison, you know, we're responsible people when we see that the county has made some calculations about the extra cost that they're assuming moving from 3 mainland authorities to 5, we inevitably ask questions to say we need to understand this because we need to understand. And that has been done through the policy formation process in conversations with the outside consultants where we ask them to explain the difference between the two numbers. And that, to me, seems an eminently reasonable thing for us to have done. But let's be really clear, and the reason it isn't in the paper is our job, I mean, although the county has done this, we haven't particularly, our job is not to explain why the county council's proposal is wrong. Our job is to explain why our proposal is right. We did this work as a kind of due diligence piece of work to assess that we hadn't made any stupid assumptions or missed something that they'd seen. We did it because we wanted to make sure that our proposal was fine. Now, it may be that if we got into the details, we would discover that there might be other factors that we'd misunderstood. But it isn't in there because we wanted to make a positive case for change for the case that we're putting forward. And that's fundamentally what you have in front of us tonight. We're not seeking to get into a big row with the county council. It's too late anyway. They've made their full council decision and they'll make their cabinet meeting tomorrow morning. and I'm sure they won't be listening to us in terms of what they do on it. But it was a piece of due diligence work that we did because we would not be responsible if we didn't understand or sense check whether our assumptions were correct. And as I said, in terms of the detailed modelling, we have seen the figures that you've seen. We have asked to see the outcome figures that come out of the work that's been done because, frankly, for us, that's appropriate. And we trust our professional colleagues, our officer colleagues, to do the work to ensure that that model is correctly done in terms of everything that sits behind it.
Councillor Lee, please.
I wasn't preparing to make any more statements. Thank you.
Councillor Horrell, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We know the importance of the 6 criteria set by government in how they will assess the proposals. And usefully, in the paper going to Cabinet tomorrow morning, there is an assessment of the various criteria and how we would fare against those on factors such as finances, growth, etc. Can you tell me whether the leadership group who have worked on this proposal feel that there is one of the, or an area here where we are weaker, where the government may find fault on the criteria, because we know you need to tick all of the boxes on the 6, or do we feel that they're all equally robust in our submission? Thank you.
Councillor Todd, please.
The 12 councils are of the view that all the proposals on the table meet the criteria and are worthy of submission. And again, it's not a competition at this stage. What we're looking for is to get through the threshold and make the decision. Everybody is coming to different conclusions. Everybody has different understandings of what's right for their area. And I can't know every last detail of what they think is right, what they think, or I think is right. I know what looks right to me in terms of what's being put forward from the position of somebody who lives in the Winchester district, probably understands the views of people who live in the Winchester district better than I do other areas, but also looks at the research, listens to colleagues from across the county to understand their views, and have come back to you with a proposal on that basis. In terms of how we weigh them all differently, people are coming to genuinely, sincerely felt different decisions. But the one in front of us today, I'm confident, meets the criteria and is worthy of submission.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Councillor Godfrey, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Cabinet have reached the point of making a positive decision on submission tomorrow without seeing any of the detailed financial models referred to in the report and by Councillor Todd in his responses. And these cover the breakdown of the detailed costs. Leaving it all to our excellent officers seems to be burdening them with responsibility beyond the scope of their role. Decision-making is the role of councillors, not of officers. And making ill-informed or partially informed decision seems dangerous in such an important matter. How can the decision on which groupings of current council areas for each unitary authority has been reached, with all its implications for the future sustainability of a mid-Hants unitary, been made without the Cabinet seeing for themselves some of the detailed financial forecasts of the costs and savings for that future mid-Hants authority?
Councillor Todd, please.
I mean, the papers you have in front of you lay out the financial position and the different options. And they justify the sustainability of the individual authorities, and they've done so in such a way that we believe makes sense. It's not particularly helpful and would add nothing to the process if we get into the sort of micromanaging every single figure that adds up to the cumulative picture, which is quite appropriately the one that we should be using to make our final decisions. That's the right way to do things. Our job, you know, this is a process where the very detailed planning is coming later, as I explained in my earlier answers, and what we need to be doing at the moment is making sure that we're using plausible, properly thought through, high-level, overall estimates of the financial position that we're talking about to make the right decision. And I'm convinced that what we have in front of us here does that and enables us to make the right decision. And I know my colleagues, well, they will tell me tomorrow if they disagree, but they feel the same way. It is not, you know, we don't do this when, for example, we see a business case for a new housing development. We don't get into the absolute weeds as to how much are we spending on, you know, bricks or something. Why would we do the same in this particular case when, if anything, it's even harder to do? And frankly, part of the challenge of this has been to stay out of the weeds and make sure that we're answering the big 6 questions that need to be answered, because those are the things that really matter, and I believe we've done so.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Councillor Bolton, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is sort of part debate and part question, because it's tricky, is all of this. I can't disaggregate the whole problem, I'm afraid. But one of my big concerns, and I've looked at both the county's proposal and I've looked at this proposal in detail, and I realised that we are here today actually to look at this proposal and no other. And I have concerns around the risk inherent within the model that has been applied to this and how we've got to where we are with these numbers. And I say this because clearly there are assumptions that go into these models, and within the report it actually quotes that this model with KPMG was applied to the Cumbria County Council unitisation, and that I guess what I'm trying to understand is how much of learning from that process has gone into creating this model and how has it been improved? Because Cumbria are yet to be able to, or Cumberland and Westmoreland are yet to be able to demonstrate what those disaggregation costs truly have been, and this goes back to something that started in April 23. They also are not able to show any true savings, and they've actually even applied for multi-year EFS. So I'm concerned that we've got inherent risk within a model that we are putting too much reliance on, and the big worry is, of course, that we overestimate the savings and we woefully underestimate the disaggregation. And I wonder what confidence you can give me that this is not the big concern that I fear it may be. Thank you.
Councillor Todd, please.
Quite early in the process, I think I came to the conclusion that we weren't going to be able to spreadsheet our way out of this. These are tools that we have to use to make an informed decision and to do the best possible job we can to do what we think is right in terms of constructing a model for what the future of local government looks like in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. That ultimately is the challenge. Now, people have done work to look at the reality of local government reorganisation versus what people were promising in advance. And that is one of the reasons why there was a discount versus what was promised in terms of how the assessment has been done. But ultimately, I think the way somebody put it to me was these financial models will take us through to the next stage of the process and then they'll be put away and never seen again, which is frankly quite plausible. And the truth is, of course, the journey forward is going to be different from anything that we write in any model. If the county model wins, the way forward will be different versus their model. if our model wins, the way forward will be different from our model. All we can do at any moment in time is do our best guess at what we think it should be, and do so in a way that's coherent and we think prudent within the overall picture. And that's what I believe we have in front of us today. The fact that we're using comparable methodology to other places is useful because that also allows you to know how to adjust it if the outcome has turned out to be different. But it is definitely the case that local government reorganisation is unlikely to be a magic bullet, because why should it? You know, we have all been trying to save money for a very long time. And so it can't, there will be savings from unitarisation, but it can't be a magic bullet. And I would come back to what I said originally, and I suspect this is why Cumbria is in the situation they're in. The scale of issue that we see with the county's deficit in particular, but the general pressures on SEND and adult social care are beyond the ability of any of the models proposed by any of the councils to solve. None of them solve the problem. All you can do is to say, on a like versus like basis, does our reorganisation model make sense? But, you know, would local government reorganisation, you know, counties likely to go to government for exceptional financial support, probably towards the end of this year, possibly the year after, but I think it'll be this year. And that will need to be addressed. And there's nothing that LGR can do that will avoid that because of the scale of challenge that they face. So it's important not to combine the two things. I think it's completely possible that you can have a business case that makes sense, that's presented to you either by me or by Nick Adams-King or anybody else, but that wouldn't mean, for example, that without tackling the issues in adult social care and children's services, that actually all of those councils wouldn't be facing extremely serious challenges almost as soon as they were created. But there's nothing that we could do within that to avoid that. And what we have to do is to say, okay, that's fine, but given the challenge we've been set, these 6 criteria, the requirement to come forward with a plan, this is what we think is right. We're balancing these 6 factors. You know, inevitably the county has taken a view that they put priority in one area, we put priority in another area. Ultimately, it's more about how we're weighing the different criteria rather than the details of the calculation that I think has led to different answers. But I'm confident that what we have in front of us is the right way forward for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight as a whole and for our residents.
Thank you, Councillor Todd.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. KPMG's extrapolation was based on historic examples of local government reorganisation elsewhere. The majority of these were aggregation models, i.e. bringing together existing authorities and creating economies of scale. Disaggregation of an existing authority and creating a greenfield authority is very different. There is also an assumption that savings rise linearly with population, but this doesn't account for pockets of deprivation or that biggest issue that local government has 18% less funding now than it had in 2010, but with a significantly rising social care bill. If the financial assumptions are correct, surely a 4-unitary model, rather than a 5, would be even more cost-effective. Can I respectfully ask why this was not modelled?
Thank you. Councillor Todd, please.
So it was modelled at an earlier stage in the process, and we decided not to do it. So it's a very simple answer to that. Sorry, I didn't catch all the other points you made. In terms of the analysis, and I've mentioned this earlier, so I'm surprised you brought it up again. The 14 cases that we're talking about, 12 of them are 2019 or later. So they're not from 2010. That's county nonsense, okay, in terms of what's being put forward. The models that we're using are more recent, and the agglomeration costs, so the savings from bringing authorities together have been estimated one way. And then, as I explained, The costs of dividing the county are a separate line and have been calculated separately and are included in the finances. But there are areas where the county has made wild over-exaggerations of, you know, what they think, again, moving from 4 authorities to 5 is likely to be. So, for example, despite, I mean, IT is one of the areas where the way they come to the figure that they have for the extra IT costs that they believe a 5 or unitary model would have versus today is by assuming that the new authority commissions and creates at very high speed a brand new system from scratch, rather than doing what has happened in every other authority that's done this, which is essentially splitting off a version of the same system to be used on a more limited geographical area, which is much cheaper and more efficient, at least as the first stage. And bear in mind also that the number of seats scale, so you need fewer people, you know, you need fewer copies of a license in order to do it. So the way the figures have been done, the way the county has made some of its exercises, its estimates are hugely exaggerated.
Can
I have a rest?
Councillor Horrell, please.
No, I can't.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for allowing me to ask another question. This evening it's very clear that Councillor Todd feels that option 2 is the best option, but we do have neighbours favouring the other options that have been put together by all of the participating councils. I'm very conscious that we have parts of our current district that are sort of in a land grab in some of the other options, Denmead, Whiteley, Newlands, and my question to you is, what is our backup plan for those parts of our district should any of those discussions be taken up by the government, given that we're very clear in our report about our view of who should stay and who has given us their view in terms of the unitary they'd like to be associated with. But have you got any other actions as a backup plan should there be further discussion about boundary changes, please?
Yes, as far as boundary changes are concerned, and Councillor Langford-Smith will know, and I thank her for the work that she did, I went out, I spoke to parishes, I explained to them how the process worked, and I explained to them how they could have a say within it. I also worked with our own comms people to make sure that we did a proper job of assessing our own residents' view in terms of what would happen. And I was very clear throughout and got promises from other leaders that they would respect the views of local residents, went to bat on the issue, and the net result is Whiteley, Wickham and Knoll, Southwark and Widley, Borrant, Denmead Parish. None of them are in anybody's proposals, and there is no way within the process, unless something very surprising happens at a full council meeting in the next day or two, that they can go back in due to us. Now, there is a step in the process where the government consults the Boundary Commission for England on the different options that are in front of them, and in theory, they could put them back in, but I don't see any reason why they would, because our research is very clear, the feedback in the surveys is very clear, the input from the parishes is very clear about people's feelings on those particular issues. I think at some point there will be useful discussions about tidying up boundaries. There was a county councillor today who was talking about, you know, there are streets in places where bins get collected on different days because they're in different local authority areas. So it would feel sensible as part of this process to do some work to tidy that up, and where, you know, boundaries follow some stream that ceased to exist 60 years ago because they built a housing estate on top of it, it's probably sensible to sort that out at some point. But there is a process for doing that, and we've said that if there are to be boundary changes, that's how it should be done. The one area where there is some tension is this question of Newlands, which is still in, but it is the only parish that is in. It's only in one of the proposals, and we will see what happens with that. But as far as we're concerned, one of the reasons that we need our proposal to go forward is because then we know with certainty that there is a proposal that goes forward that has no boundary changes in the Winchester district.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. If there are no further questions, and I see, oh, there you go.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wallace, please.
Slightly different topic. Everybody has been working really hard on getting these proposals together, and I know how much effort is taken from everybody. And you know, I know Councillor Lee and others have thanked our officers already, and I've seen similar hard work been happening at Hampshire as well. Their officers have been working incredibly hard as well. So I just wanted to say, obviously there was I'm concerned about the issues raised by the leader of Hampshire County Council, Nick Adams-King, regarding incorrect and misleading statements in the report. This might just be because of rushing or whatever, I don't know, but do you have plans to address, or are you able to address these concerns before the report is submitted? Thank you.
Councillor Todd, please.
We made a very conscious decision that we weren't going to respond to the letter that we had from the leader of Hampshire County Council. One adjustment has already been made in the report, not because it wasn't what we were told on the subject of one of the health bodies that we spoke to, but despite it being their view, they did ask that it was removed from the papers. So we reported what came out accurately in a conversation, but we decided that because they'd rather it wasn't in there, that we would remove it. But as far as we're concerned, we're happy to justify all the other complaints that were made. We will not be making any adjustment to the report and do not believe there is any inaccuracy involved.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Councillor Rutter, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The question this evening is simple. Do we throw up our hands and, following the example of Gosport, throw our toys out of the pram and just say no to the government's decision to impose new unitary authorities on us? Or do we take the responsible route, accept the challenge from government and put forward a preferred option for the new unitary authority to cover our communities? And let's think about our communities. Within the parameters given to us, clearly the option which best keeps local government as close to our communities as possible, whilst also being big enough to cope with the extra and vital work of a unitary authority, is option 2. While sincerely sympathising with the New Forest, the realities of geography and the increased difficulty and cost of running a planning system, close to my heart, that has to take into account 3 different planning policies, 2 national park plans and 1 consolidated new unitary local plan, is just not reasonable. Add to that, have you ever tried to drive into the New Forest on any sunny day in the summer? Or worse still, on a bank holiday? It's been impossible. Seriously though, let's give option 2 our wholehearted support, as it represents a new authority that remains relatively local, that will give realistic economies of scale, and that will keep similar communities, rural areas based around thriving market towns, together. I want to say huge thanks to our leader and to our officers for all their hard work in putting together this incredibly we had very short notice to do it, and it was a huge amount of work for them, and I do commend them entirely. May I make one final plea to all my colleagues, and that is that we take great care to retain and sustain the historic mayoralty of Winchester, nearly 1,000 years of history, epitomised in the person of the Mayor of Winchester, second only in precedence to the Lord Mayor of London, and a priceless living embodiment of the longevity and importance of our local government and our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ratta. Councillor Clear, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, the government launched an ambitious programme of local government reorganisation that will implement unitary local government across England. We, as many others, were invited to develop proposals for reorganisation. The objective is for the whole of England to be covered by both unitary local government and mayoral devolution. It also presents challenges such as need for transparency and community development during the post-process and the potential for financial strain on local authorities if not managed properly. Whilst some advocate for reorganisation as a means to improve governance, others question its necessity and the impact of local democracy and community reorganisation. Whilst local government reorganisation can offer significant benefits, it also comes with its own challenges that must be carefully managed. During this process, we have collaborated with town and parish councils to determine how they can most effectively manage local assets in future arrangements. But residents' initial reaction to hearing about the local government reorganisation was a lack of clarity as to what this would actually mean for them. Residents emphasised the importance of local communities being engaged throughout the LGR process, as this will ensure that services are built to look after the residents they serve. Also, I add that the needs and priorities of rural communities are vastly different from those in more urban settings. But I feel, as a council, we have promoted strong and fair representation for communities and businesses, and communities can have a greater say in the services that matter most to them. Street surveys have taken place, I know because I was out there doing them. Local engagement has taken place, and to me, the people have spoken in favour of option 2. In fact, many have said, where Winchester goes, we will go. I give my full support for option 2 within the proposal for submission to government. And may I just say, as others have said tonight, thank you, Leader, thank you, Chief Exec, and all the staff and officers. You've done a grand job. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clear. Councillor Horrell, please.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. And before Council enters the final decision around the future of local government in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, I also want to pay tribute to our staff who've worked tirelessly on these proposals and will continue to do so until we've delivered local government reform as required by the Labour government, even though they had no manifesto commitment to do so. So thank you to our Chief Executive, Laura Taylor, and her teams. And also thank you to the council staff who are sticking with us on this bumpy road, because there's much more ahead yet. The proposed local government reorganisation on this scale and on a fast-track timeframe, as we've already heard this evening, can only succeed if we all pull together. So I would endorse an approach that does not criticise other authorities. Local government reform is not just about our structures or our finances. It's about building a system that makes it easier for us to continue to deliver essential services to a high standard that are easy for our residents to access. It's about giving our neighbourhoods and communities a voice and creating councils that are financially secure, and it's about our communities feeling that they are actually party to this change. However, I've reviewed the many reports and appendices presented to us this evening, and I'm still struggling to identify the core financial calculations that support the recommendation before us tonight. And we've actually heard from the leader that we should not be reviewing the detailed financial assumptions. I personally believe this is wrong. For such a significant council decision, we wouldn't dream of not looking at the numbers if we were deciding on something like a housing development or a key contract. And it's a sadness to me that we haven't been able to access that. And as I said earlier, the monitoring officer assures me that that's the same for all of us. And I do feel, as councillors, we should have had that opportunity. I'm personally not adverse to the mid-Hants option. I just wish I'd had the access to the data to be really clear about the decision that we're being asked to endorse. I am open to that persuasion if only those numbers had been made available. However, I would like to say thank you to Councillor Todd this evening, who's fielded all of the questions that we've raised, and also to the officers who clearly were helping behind the scenes. I'm disappointed, actually, that no Lib Dem councillors saw fit to represent their residents tonight by asking questions. We weren't making a political point, we just wanted to know what the detail was and hope that we've been able to bring some clarity for all of the residents of the district about the decision that we're being asked to make in this chamber. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Councillor Godfrey, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For over 49 years, I managed teams mostly in central and local government. A report of over 100 pages is not supposed to be read. This 540-page report is full of well-crafted and reassuring words about the ambition of Hampshire councils, but I'm left unconvinced by the lack of detail provided. We need to get the finances right, so the same high-quality services that Hampshire residents receive now can be delivered in future. Call me a cynic or doubting Thomas, but I've seen and heard nothing to give me any confidence in these options to deliver a sustainable outcome. That is not because I do not trust the advice from our officers, but I need to understand the detail so I can sell the decisions to our residents. The net savings on the paper of £63.9 million a year is based largely on extrapolating forecasts made from previous LGRs, resized for Hampshire. Despite Councillor Todd's assertion, current delivery costs are not shown in Appendix 5 and are barely referred there. HCC have made this savings estimate for the proposals in front of us using actual costs and budgets, which forecasts a savings of nearly £95 million a year less than we are considering in this paper. We must not ignore such a big difference. The use of historic data may be no better than guesswork. Why are Cabinet advised to be so optimistic about the savings that can be delivered by these proposals without themselves seeing the detailed models? And when we cannot even deliver half of the £3 million annual savings that the City Council have been working on for 3 years. The paper gives no breakdown of savings and costs by unitary and by option, either for implementation or on an ongoing budget. How can we tell if each unitary will be financially sustainable without more information? The claim that there will be £25 million of savings on contracts from contract consolidation is a joke at our expense. Suppliers will milk the new councils to ensure they retain at least their current margins. Appendix 6 is an external report supporting the case for smaller council areas that may be beautiful and socially more attractive, but there is no evidence that they are financially more sustainable. The case examples are interesting social studies, but they do not give examples of sustainable local services. The councils referenced in Appendix 6 include Wigan Council with a £10 million annual budget gap, Plymouth Sat Council, which has a £17 million gap, Somerset Council, £36 million, Gateshead Council, £49.9 million, Swansea Council, £50 million, and so on. This evidence shows that small is costly. I would be reluctant to go against the views of our residents who leant towards option 2 as their preferred outcome, even though the information presented during consultation was limited. Without more relevant evidence, I do not think that we can express a clear preference. In the MOD, savings in a business case were immediately deducted from future budgets. We must be more cautious about the savings claimed. Better to underpromise and overdeliver than to overpromise and underdeliver. We must not offer up a promise of savings to a government that is desperate to fill the ever-deepening hole in their coffers, particularly when it is clear that we do not have any idea of what the financial future could begin to look like for a new mid-Hants authority. We must amend the proposal that we are going to submit to show a less optimistic view and allow us to over-deliver in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Godfrey. Councillor Tippett-Cooper, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Councillor Todd, you've had a lot of questions tonight you've had to deal with very ably, and many of those questions suggest that this is some form of choice, and it's clearly not. This proposal is 12 councils doing the best they can to put the most logical case forward within the framework imposed upon them, and that is imposed upon us by the government. Now, I think I understand what other members are asking in terms of the granular detail they want to see in Appendix 5's financial model, but the criticism made on this is in effect a sweeping criticism of 12 councils who are advancing this proposal, I hasten to add. And I suspect if you did drill down into how the assumptions in Appendix 5 have been generated, you'd have a completely unwieldy paper for us tonight. And the fact of the matter is, you do have to have a good and reasonable degree of trust in the Section 151 monitoring officers from 12 different councils, the financial professionals involved in generating these figures in these tables in Appendix 5. They are assumptions. I hasten to add assumptions. They're not meant to be definitive figures. And for the purposes of our decision tonight, Appendix 5 is plainly sufficient detail on the financial modelling and plainly sufficient for us to make a decision. I would also say how impressive it is that those councils have been working so well together. And I welcome the praise to officers from all sides. It really does go without saying. It's plainly been a huge amount of work to produce this for us tonight. And especially in circumstances where, lest we forget, that these government proposals create a great deal of uncertainty for the officers personally in a really changing local government landscape. The key point, I think, made right at the outset by Councillor Todd is option 2 advanced in this paper is the one with the most local support. And indeed, I note the common purpose of the paper is that all 12 councils are seeking to develop the best proposal for our residents. And that's what option 2, I think, is. I note the stark comment in the paper that illuminates the concern with the Hampshire County Council's approach. I don't think it's criticism, by the way. I think it's been dealt with quite reasonably, how we've said that that's their view of what's best. Our view of what best differs. But it's notable that the paper describes that one less council in this regime would create some of the largest council populations in the country in this area, similar to Leeds in population, but spread over geographical areas larger than Greater London or Greater Manchester. And I think that's just a sort of stark example of why the Hampshire County Council option isn't as good as this one that we have before us tonight. I really look forward to Winchester City Council taking forward what is what it's best in class at in this new world we're entering into. Winchester City Council, the top-rated council for its action tackling climate change, of course, and indeed the brilliant housing team. And I'd like to just draw on that case study in the paper, which refers to the absolutely incredible work that happened in a case I know very well, involving a 29-bed supported housing contract, which the county council withdrew its funding for. And the City Council's housing team did an incredible job re-accommodating and supporting those individuals involved. So I was very pleased to see that case study in the paper, in fact. Following Councillor Rutter's plug to protect the mayoralty, which I fully endorse, my own plug is to note that we, as we move forward as a council, continue to support our values as a city of sanctuary, and for Winchester to be a city of sanctuary in this new world. And finally, just to say, I think option 2 is the most sensible option. It's in terms of the logic of building a council area community around a city hub, city anchors, I think it describes it as, and the most sensible in terms of population size these councils will serve. And I will be supporting option 2. Thank you once again to officers and Councillor Todd.
Thank you, Councillor Tippett Cooper. Councillor Morris, please.
Thank you. Fellow councillors, Mr Mayor, as you know, well, nearly all the cities, borough and district councils in Hampshire agreed to consult on 3 broadly similar options with 5 unitary councils. Hampshire County Council and East Hampshire District Council are proposing a radically different plan with 4 unitary councils, and Hampshire split by a dividing line from north to south. Now, as both parties have conducted public consultations of Hampshire residents, the same Hampshire residents, and both say they are considering the views of residents, the question is, how can they have reached such entirely different conclusions about what the public wants? Well, one explanation may be that while the city, borough and district councils got responses from 13,336 residents, Hampshire and East Hampshire only got responses from about 3,500. But another thing to consider is the nature of Hampshire County Council's survey. Have you seen it? It turns out to have been a succession of banal non-questions, like, on a scale from 0 to 10, how important do you think it is that your local council ensures council taxpayers receive good services for their money? Now, apart from the entertainment value of seeing how many people give a score of 0, that's a pointless question. And the whole survey is like that, a series of equally pointless questions that tell you nothing about people's views on the various LGR options. The one thing that the survey could have been used to find out, they didn't ask. What a wasted opportunity. And so it can hardly be regarded as a consultation on the various LGR options or be used to justify Hampshire's approval of option B2, which just happens to be the option they preferred before conducting the survey. Indeed, they presented it in the survey as a foregone conclusion. So they say we've listened to the views of residents, but there's nothing in their proposal to support that claim, as residents had no opportunity to express a preference. On the other hand, by way of dramatic contrast, the survey conducted by the various city, borough and district councils, including Winchester, did ask residents for their views about LGR and gave them a choice of options, which is why we know with great certainty that when we vote in favour of option 2, we will be reflecting the actual views of our residents, because we've asked them and listened. Because LGR can only succeed if it reflects the public's wishes and has their clear support, unlike Hampshire's proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. Councillor Porter, please.
Thank you very much. I think we have to remember, and actually the leader of the county council says this as well, this is not a business we're talking about. This is a place-based demand. The organisation of services within the area has to be based on the demand in that area, and it's a key to the costs. The council has to meet that demand of the area it covers, whether it's tiny or huge. It was laudable that all authorities started off by working together, and 15 all sat down together and agreed to share their data. The discussion tonight is crucially about with whom we want to share a unitary. We know that the figures have been transparent, we know they've been between the leaders, and we need to know now with whom we're going to share the unitary. We know that the figures that we're using, both at the County Council and in our own work, are approximations based as far as possible on working examples and recent working examples given by organisations who are considered to be experts in this area, KPMG and PwC. But actually, when we looked at those figures, when we've challenged the numbers, when they've deviated so dramatically from our own, the responses certainly have made sense to me when I've asked those questions. The key issue is that the unitaries will not sit on their own, but under a mayoralty. So the size of them is not necessarily, the smaller size is not necessarily a problem. In fact, if you look at Manchester, it's 2.8 million people, and it's got 10 unitary authorities underneath it. So they're all smaller than what we're going to be talking about here. Unitaries will draw in the adult and children's social care, not Hampshire giving out social care. So I personally really object to the description of a greenfield authority. Every single part of Hampshire is covered by an authority that's doing a good job, and they can be relied on to take on the role and the responsibilities of the extra things they're going to take in. There'll be excellent staff, not only from the authority that sits there, from the districts that we're making up the unitary, but also staff from the County Council, one assumes, that will come across as well. They will be drawing in that expertise. So each authority will feel different, and it's how different they all feel and how near we feel to our neighbours that makes the unitary authority that we're talking about tonight. So going back to the question, crucially, the discussion tonight is about with whom we want to share a unitary with. And in my opinion, the one that we've come to tonight, to option 2, is the best fit. It may not be perfect. Lots of the others have come up, all the other local authorities have come up with slight variations from this, but actually it's the best we can possibly do. The county is really conscious of its deficit. None of the districts have got a deficit they can't manage. The county's deficit is beyond that of any unitary to solve, and we'll need help to solve those huge deficits. But for the moment, if we're working on a working assumption year by year of the authorities we're talking about here, the unitaries we're going to create, I think that the one that's being proposed tonight of option 2 is the best fit that we can find. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Councillor Pett, please. Petts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, let me then, as a Liberal Democrat member, speak up for the residents of the villages of the Upper Meon and Upper Itchen valleys. I have to say that, in my experience, most people, other than the keener parish council students of LGR, predominantly show a marked disinterest in the detailed proposals tabled. That is until 2 key points are brought to their attention. The first is that there's a stark choice of whether to end up in an authority that, whilst it may not always be focused on rural issues, at least will look to have more obvious synergy with their daily lives, or be part of a future authority that includes Basingstoke and Rushmore. They, and indeed I, bear no ill will whatsoever towards the residents of those towns, but nor do we recognise any sense of common place with them. In the Upper Meon and Upper Itchen valleys, we are residents of the Hampshire Downs, who mostly, though far from exclusively, look to Winchester and Petersfield as our service centres, if you will. Option 2 surely best serves their sense of place. But the second point is that they will, in the future world, be served by a ward or division member that will simply have neither the time nor bandwidth to know their small communities and the many smaller hamlets in between, to the same level of familiarity that I and my ward colleague, Councillor Bolton, do now, and as have many of our predecessors before us. But we've been set an exam question, as the leader said, and it is no use, as he also said, refusing to answer it. So it's with a heavy heart that I find myself with little alternative than to support the recommendation. And in doing so, obviously congratulate Chief Exec Laura and her team on getting us to this point. But I do nonetheless believe it is a sad evening for all in the rural communities in Winchester District, whatever the final outcome of LGR. Their voice, through inevitably reduced future representation, will be diminished, wherever the future seat of their unitary authority is going to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Betts. Councillor Lee, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I hinted at this here earlier. I'm worried about the risks. I'm worried about the loss of localism, as are many of my constituents. Decisions more remote, less local, loss of identity. But of course, we will get behind the best pathway for delivery of local government reorganisation. Option 2 is probably the least worst case. As mentioned, I would prefer a pause to consolidate an agreed common approach across the whole of Hampshire and Solent. That looks unlikely. Therefore, we're relying on MHCLG to apply pragmatism and very careful consideration so that all the risks, and I've hinted at some of those, are dealt with and considered appropriately before a decision is made. We don't want conceptual outcomes. We want the final decision to be grounded in sustainability. After all, this is the biggest change in local government organisation in 50 years. Our communities must be served by the best outcome. So, for me, the jury is out, but of course, option 2 is the least worst case. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Latham, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, as I hope fellow members in the Chamber tonight will agree, it is not councillor allowances that are behind the crisis in local government funding, although I haven't seen the county's specific modelling on that. But no matter what orientation of unitary councils is eventually decided for us by the central government, drastically fewer councillors, up to or around 50% fewer than we currently have, each covering much larger geographies, means that local government will be less accessible and less accountable to the public as a result of this. In a time of disintegrating trust in politics and democracy itself, taking elected representatives, the very visible neighbourhood link with the democratic process, taking them further away from the people they represent is, I believe, simply the wrong thing to be doing. However, my rant on democracy over, I too would like to add my thanks to the leader, the chief exec, all of the council staff, both here and around the county, for all their hard work. I would like to assure the residents of Bishop's Waltham that my questions have been ably addressed at the many briefings that we have been provided with by the council team, the most recent of which, with sight of these papers, was just last week. I thank them for keeping us abreast of the situation. We've had many questions this evening on the minutiae of the financial modelling. I trust, again, the numbers that the excellent staff have come up with, and I, for one, do not need access to the spreadsheets. But as Councillor Todd has already told us, none of these models, none of them, make so much as a dent on the structural budget deficit at the County Council. So I ask, again, are we simply rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic of local government? I will be voting tonight in support of the recommendation before us. It is the least bad option on offer. The proposal for 4 mainland unitaries in Hampshire is better than 3. And option 2 is better than option 1, or option 1A, as it is now known. It keeps decision-making closer to the people who elect their councils. There's clearly a balance between efficiency and size in this reorganisation. But under the county's 3 unitary model, for example, creating rural unitary councils that would become the 3rd and 4th largest councils by population in the UK after the cities of Birmingham and Leeds is the wrong side of that balance, and those councils would not be close enough to be local. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Latham. Councillor Gramerson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to jump in here as I've been hearing some of these comments about being less local. I think when we started this process, I shared those concerns that the new unitaries would be substantially larger and in terms of geography and in span of population. But that was me as a district councillor in the district model where we have 3 councillors in our ward. And this young lady here, covers the AIV division of the county all on her own. And the new warding, or whatever it's going to be called, under the unitary system that I've understood is going to be of a similar size and a similar population as the current county divisions. And I believe we're talking about having, I think it's 3 councillors representing that new area. Now, given at the moment 1 person is representing that area for all the services that the county council delivers, and some of them are extremely important in terms of the need to know local people, whether it is SAN, whether it is adult social care. They're hugely sensitive matters to have to deal with, where you do have to get to know the individual. I think actually, if we get out of our district model of thinking, we start thinking more about the services that will be delivered under a unitary organisation, and think about those types of services delivered by the upper tier, I think we can actually make a case that we're actually going to be more local rather than less local. So I would like members just to think that one through. You may come to a different conclusion to me. Now, the option that's been put forward, creates a set of 4 unitaries on the mainland that are fairly close to being equal in terms of population, possibly about as close as you could get without doing lots and lots of boundary reviews. There are similarities in the mix of environment and the population types and the challenges in delivering services. I think that's rounded up in the phrase place. Now, some members seem to want to enter into some kind of analysis paralysis, which would result in failing to submit any kind of proposal and would, excuse if I can read my writing here, and wouldn't actually tell us any more than we currently know already. It might give us a lot more detail, but that would make the report about twice as large, if not more, than it currently is. And I don't think would actually inform us any better. So submitting the proposal means that there is for the people of the Winchester district, a proposal on the table that has a good option on the table for MHCLG to consider, and it is backed by a good enough level of detail, analysis and assumptions. So I am extremely comfortable to support this proposal put forward as being the option that represents the best case for our constituents. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Gramerson. Councillor Bolton, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. True to form, my laptop's crashed with mine on, so I'm just going to speak off the top of my head. Dangerous, I know. What Jerry says is absolutely right. He and I have worked very closely together and diligently to try and keep our residents very much abreast of the whole concept of local government reorganisation. And it's not a choice that we have here to either do it or not. It is that it is happening, and we have to get on with it one way or the other. One of the big debates that we have with the parish councils, and Jerry and I both share this concern, is that democratic deficit that these changes will bring about. We currently work on a ratio of 1 of us to about 2,250 of our residents, of our electorate, that is. The county, Jonathan, he's got, and Malcolm have got, 1 of them to 18,000, roughly. And we're going to move to 1 to about 6,000 to 7,000, somewhere in that sort of region, which is a big change. And that's concerning to me as one of the elements of all of the local government reorganisation. But there's nothing much we can do about that. It's happening. So then I look at the other bits that concern me, which are, I do feel that I would have liked a bit more detail. And this is not, and it is definitely not, Councillor Cremoyson, that we're in search of paralysis by analysis. It's just understanding a bit more about the assumptions that have been taken and how some of these decisions have been made. And I have read both documents carefully, and I feel that there is a lack of transparency for me. I'd like to see a bit more detail so that I can make a judgment for myself. But then I don't think tonight we're being asked to make a judgment, because there is no vote for or against, according to the papers, for this. It is literally that you guys will vote on this tomorrow in Cabinet. And we are here to sort of voice our concerns and our support. And like Councillor Horrell said, I'm not averse to either, to be perfectly honest. I just wanted a bit more transparency so that I could understand which edged one above the other. And I'm not sure is the honest answer. But what I am concerned about is that there may be too much reliance placed on models that are, back to a conversation that Councillor Cremoyson and I had over a very smelly bag of rotting fruit at the Waste and Recycling Centre. I think it was George Box you corrected me on, didn't you? That there are, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And I'm not entirely sure how useful the models are. And I worry that, and I've seen it before, and we've all seen it in COVID, that too much reliance sometimes is placed on models. And we believe too much the fact that savings or the positives, there's that inherent sort of bias that we like to build in things that, gives us confidence where it shouldn't necessarily. And so I worry that we are over-egging the savings, and God knows there's huge disparity. There's a 95 million swing between the county's version of a 5 unitary authority and the 12 councils' view. And then, the disaggregation costs, again, I fear that some of those, the key example given of Cumbria is one that is struggling to even validate what those costs were or the savings were. So I don't know is the answer, what the right answer is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. I guess there are no other points you want to raise? Okay. So, Leader, please can you highlight the matters that you will take forward to tomorrow's Cabinet meeting for consideration, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will certainly do that. And I would like to thank people for a considered debate. And I absolutely understand. I have sat on the opposite side. I have sat at Hampshire County Council as the lead scrutiny member on the main principal scrutiny committee and said, why have I not been able to challenge these numbers? Why have I not been able to look at them in more depth? But that's partly because I know that if I look at all the other criteria, I know what I'm looking for in terms of an outcome. I look at the other things which aren't the finances and say, I have to create something that makes sense in terms of its geography, in terms of its economy, because the truth is, the financial model that we have here, we're designing for the next 50 years. It's irrelevant to what 20 years' time is going to look like. And at that point, having got the scale right, having got the fundamental design right, having created areas that make sense in terms of their economics, in terms of their housing delivery, in terms of all the other things that the government's asked to look at, will be the thing that people remember us for, whether we got that right or not. The county is promising £49 million a year savings. We're promising 63 in terms of our figures. And the county's deficit in 28-29 is forecast to be £280 million a year. And I suspect it was a similar position in Cumbria. What you have in front of us in terms of financial viability is a calculation of what's called comparative viability. It's saying, this is what happens if you take this option versus that option. But, and versus if you do nothing. But let's not forget, do nothing in the next 5 years has a £2 billion hole at Hampshire County Council. The forecast deficit, I told you what the ongoing savings were, 49 if you believe the county, 64 if you believe the 12, and the forecast deficit at Hampshire alone is 281. It's in their own papers in 28-29. And the other authorities, it's 42 million. So we know now that in 28-29 that there are £320 million gap in the finances, and we know now that none of the models proposed by anybody can fully address that. And I think that's been a source of some confusion, because that's why Cumbria has a problem. That's why everywhere has a problem, because that fundamental issue remains in place. And the details of the local government reorganisation don't affect that. We're not saying that the deficit goes to, it will be cut by, will be, or that there will be a surplus magically of £64 million a year across the whole local government system. Nobody's saying that. What we're saying is that with your starting point of a 320 million deficit, if everything works, it could be 63 million less than that. But it's still a deficit. And that's the fundamental problem we're up against here. Sorry, this financial argument is the concern that I've heard that comes out of this. And again, just for clarity, the historic data is not used as the basis for comparison, for basis of calculation. It's one of the techniques that, frankly, you would expect us to be using, that is used to make an estimate as to what the actual detailed figures, which all councils are using on the same basis, how much you adjust those for possible savings. There's one way of doing it is the top-down, which we've done, and actually the county has done as well through PwC. And then there is the bottom-up reality check, which we have done, and I suspect the county have done as well. So I just think it is really important. And I suppose the question I'd ask you is, even if the figures were the other way around, and county was saving 60 million and we were saving 40 million, would it actually change our decision? And would either of them be real? I mean, the one thing I can tell you with absolute certainty is no matter which option is chosen, the saving that we are looking at in 5 years' time is going to be neither 63.9 million nor 49 million. That I can tell you with total confidence. This is a decision-making tool. It's helping us to make a reasoned decision about, and I may borrow the words here of Councillor Lee, the least worst option. And I wish we weren't in that world, but we are. We were given a set of rules which we would not have picked. We were given a set of rules about the size of authorities. We were given a set of rules about the timetable and the process. And we've followed those rules because we're one of the most centralised countries in the world, and that's what local government in this country does. We followed them, and we've... unless you're gospel, in which case you just do your own thing. But we've followed those rules, and we have come out with what we think is the best option. And, there is a lot of detail in the finances. I realise it doesn't tell you every single last line of every single last budget of every single last council. But I'm not sure we would be having a different discussion now, and I'm not sure, frankly, to what degree it would affect our decision. Because what's been useful about the debate is that people have come forward with all the other things that we need to be thinking about. In the end, I strongly suspect, particularly Councillor Langford-Smith, is not neutral about a situation where we are proposing an option that does not have boundary changes, and many other councils are. And if we don't put this in, the proposal with boundary changes, and I know Councillor Brooke isn't a wild fan of what's happening in Newlands, that will be on the table, and our option, which doesn't change the boundaries in Newlands, will not be on the table. I know the people who are concerned about whether what happens if we put Southwark or Denmead or Whiteley in with the Northern authorities, with Aldershot and Farnborough. And if we don't put something forward, the option that does that will be on the table, and our option will not be on the table. And so I in the end, am reassured that the financial assessment is good enough. Frankly, if the numbers were the other way round and I thought we would save another £20 million a year on something, an estimate that's never going to happen by having three mainland authorities rather than 4, it's actually, I know their estimates, and I would put the other factors in, and the logic and the reality of place and community and manageable scale and all the other things we've talked about would carry my weight more seriously. Now, we've talked about other things, other issues that have come up. I think I appreciated the reference to the quality of the survey that was done. I appreciated the arguments that many made supporting option 2, and I've not heard, to be fair to people here this evening, I don't think I'm hearing that we should go into tomorrow's cabinet meeting and say that we don't want option 2 on the table. We want one of option 1, 1A, or the county option to be the one that goes forward versus option 2. I'm not, I hope I've understood that correctly. And is it because it's the most amazing way forward? No, but it is the best, I think, within the parameters that we've been set. There are other issues we need to discuss, and we need to discuss those later in the process. Again, what I've been reassured, I don't know if it's true or not, is that the number of councillors that we've picked, a point that Councillor Latham raised, which I'm very pleased he did, you know, we put this in the report and then it's never seen again, and we don't really know what's going to come out of when the government comes back and makes its decision. The one thing we do know, and it's the thing that has pushed the size up, is the Boundary Commission for England is absolutely clear that you cannot have more than 100. And that's the thing that has reduced back the numbers, because they're absolutely clear that no council can have more than 100 people. And generally what we tried to do was target the number of councillors to be appropriate to similar sized unitaries, but then we had a cap of 100, particularly once you started getting up to bigger ones, and that pushed the size up, and it's why the counties ended up with 95, because you're not allowed to have more than that, and if you do, they'll just get rid of them. So the choice we have in front of us, and the choice so what I will be taking forward tomorrow is concerns still remain about the finances, and we will talk about that. I'm hearing that broadly, people are in the shape of supporting option 2. I think I'm hearing from the majority of people in the room that they think we should submit rather than not submit, because effectively, if we don't submit, we are supporting 1A or the county option. And that you've given us things that we need to keep working on as the process goes forward, to keep advocating to get the right number of councils, to keep working to say that the process from here on in looks at risk and absolutely looks at environmental considerations more deeply. I would love to have that properly factored into the next stage of consideration. That as we work forward, we understand some of the financial issues more deeply and how individual services need to be modelled. But that work will come when we know what the configuration is that we're in. And I'm confident that we've done enough, we have enough in front of us today to make a sound decision that is worthy of this council's support, worthy of cabinet support, that will be ultimately the best way forward for the residents of our district, the residents of Hampshire, and provides a good platform not just to get through the stresses of the next 5 or 10 years, but in the same way as the people who designed the system in 1974 is designed to take us through the next 50 years. So I don't want to prejudge what my colleagues decide tomorrow morning, but I go in there thinking that we have the right way forward. We will discuss some of those issues. We will make sure that we think about them for the future, but we will be putting forward a positive proposal that within the constraints we have does the best possible job for our district and for the county for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Officers, are there any further points to add? None. None. Thank you. The recommendations in report CL 176 are that we make any comments to Cabinet to consider, and the leader has summarised these. Members, anything further to add?
Mr. Mayor, would it be helpful to have an indicative vote on the options?
Do we want a recorded vote? No, we can. Okay, we can have. What's the? What are we going to vote for?
An indicative vote rather than a formal recorded vote, just so that to indicate the views of council, because we don't make the decision, the Cabinet will make the decision, but to indicate to Cabinet the views of council.
Councillor Williams.
Mr. Mayor, could I request a recorded vote to be awkward?
Of you to tell me that. Are there any 5 hands who will support this recorded vote?
Mr. Mayor, what are we voting on? Because there is no agenda item which allows a decision to be made.
Sorry, if I may jump in there, we would only be voting on the recommendations, support for the 4 recommendations as set out. Sorry. No, you wouldn't be making a decision on the recommendation. That's a Cabinet decision, to be clear. It's not a council decision.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Rule of Procedure 7.1 XI, number 11. Give us a agenda item to receive and consider reports of the leader and committees and other groups. This report did not fall into that category. And was being considered under your blessing as an additional item only. And therefore there is no rule of procedure which would allow a vote to be held, I would contend.
Shall I help, Mr. Mayor? Clearly there's a proposal on the floor that some members wish to present their view to assist Cabinet tomorrow. So if you are so minded, Mr. Mayor, you could ask Council to indicate by raising their hand if they wish to, in general, support the recommendations, which is that the Cabinet will consider a positive affirmation from Council, not a vote, that Cabinet will consider the view of Council to be that they submit the submission tomorrow, and that the view of council is that option 2 is the preferred option. If you wish to seek the view of council in that way, Mr Mayor, I think a show of hands, and it can be for, against and abstain, is at your discretion, Mr Mayor.
I support that, and that will be the indicative vote we will have. So for the purpose of indicative vote, those who support this particular option, please raise their hands.
So, Mr Mayor, that's for support for the making this, forgive me, Mr Mayor, no, submitting the submission as listed on the papers tonight, and that option 2 is the supported proposal. So there is clearly a view of support there, but we will, of course, ask for those against and those that wish to abstain.
People who are councillors, members who are against it, raise their hands, please. Councillors who abstain from voting. 1, 2, 3. 3. 4. 4 abstention.
And a number, Mr Mayor, who do not wish to exercise a vote on the matter this evening. Would that be a fair representation? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, members. Can we continue, please? So, thank you. Recommendations in report CL 176 are that we make any comments to Cabinet to consider, and the leader has summarised these. Members, anything further to add? And we have already gone through that process. So, thank you. Officer, do you want to add anything else to it? No. And can I therefore assume that Council also notes that Cabinet is being asked to approve the final submission regarding local government reorganisation in Hampshire and Isle of Wight? Okay, we've gone through that. Okay. So, members, the next item of business this evening is agenda item 7, changes to committee membership. Mr. John.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've not been notified of any changes to committees. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, members. That concludes the formal business of this evening. Please, can officers turn the broadcast?